So today we have a scholar, a writer, and a vivid thought leader on various subjects. The first book I would like to mention is The Life of Yogananda by Philip Goldberg, The Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times by Philip Goldberg, and one of my most favorite, which is American Veda. And today we will be discussing this one. Welcome, Phil.
Good to be with you.
Phil, thank you for being with me today. And it's just such a good pleasure to have a nice day to cover and meet.
Honored that you would come to my home.
Nice a pleasure. So, first thing first, I have heard about American Eagle, American Express, you know, and but I never heard about American Veda.
Well, it's just a book title.
Oh,
And
okay.
actually, you want to hear, it's a funny story. It was the title my editor came up with.
Mm-hmm.
And there I got some angry emails from India.
Really?
And when I did a book tour in India when it came out there, and I even got scolded by a Swami. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, why? What are they angry about? And they thought it means America is stealing the Vedas.
Oh.
And they were claiming that the Vedas are American. And I said, oh, you haven't read the book.
Yeah, that's something interesting. Did you respond any one of them?
What's that?
Did you respond any one of those?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I explained. Read the book. It means it's about the Vedic knowledge coming to America and
Mhm.
making, a great contribution to American life. It's not stealing the Vedas. I wouldn't do that.
Interesting. Another question comes to my mind is, you could do the book on Bible, you know, could be Christianity.
Many
But
people have done that.
okay. So, what was your interest? Like,
Ah,
what triggered that emotion or decision to select Veda?
well, this is a personal history, is in a certain, not the book is not a personal history, but my personal history plays into it. I was a student in the 1960s and very discontent and searching for answers to important questions of life, and I was not getting them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of many, many people, young people at that time, who started to search and explore other perspectives. And when I first was exposed to the spiritual teachings that were born in India,
Mm-hmm.
what the world calls Hinduism and Buddhism, um, but more specifically, Vedanta and yoga philosophy, I started to resonate with those principles and ideas, and I thought, oh, there's a lot more than I realized is available to me. And I got voracious about it. I just voracious. I mean, not voracious.
Mm-hmm.
Voracious in reading as much as I could. So I went from people writing about Indian philosophy to the Gita and the Upanishads, and it changed my life for the better. And then I realized all the teachings point to the importance of sadhana
Mm-hmm.
and practice. And I took up meditation back in the late 60s, and that transformed my life, the practices. And I became a teacher of them, on and on. So that it all started with my personal search. But I was only one of millions of people making the same transitions in their lives, especially young people back then, but not just young people. And so when I became a professional writer and sometime in the 1980s, I thought, I know a lot of people whose lives were changed because of India's spiritual teachings and practices.
Beautiful.
And I did a little research and I thought, this is a bigger phenomenon than just
Mhm.
me and some friends.
Wow.
And so I proposed the book back in the 80s, and I couldn't get any publisher interested. So I put it away, and I would just add to my files of information over the next 20 years. And at a certain point in the early or mid 2000s, the phenomenon that I saw happening had grown so much that it was obvious that this is an important subject, an important history, and it's had an important effect on American life. And I was able to demonstrate that enough to get editors at Random House interested in it. And so the result was American Veda, which came out in 2010.
Wow.
And everything that's happened since 2010 has convinced me I was right, and it's even more so now. And so that's the story of why I did that. The effects of other religions, Western religions on America is for other scholars to handle, and there's a zillion books about that, but no one had done this. And so I thought, this is a needed addition.
Beautiful. Did you have any, or did you meet any guru when you were discovering?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, at first, my personal search coincided with the Beatles taking up transcendental meditation and going to India. That, we can talk about it if you like, but that was a huge moment in the history of religion and spirituality.
So you must have met Maharishi
Mahesh Yogi.
Beautiful.
And so that's when he became world famous. And I was, looking into Zen Buddhism and yoga and all kinds of stuff, but then everybody was talking about transcendental meditation because of the Beatles. So at a certain point, I took it up.
Wow.
And so he was my first guru. Then I decided to become a teacher of it, and I spent a lot of time with him. And then in the years past, since, when I was researching this, and after it came out, and I'd be doing public speaking and interviewing people, and going to India, I've taken tours to India. I've met a lot of other gurus, of course, living ones, some now passed. But he was my first, along with a million other people.
So I just wanted to mention that Phil actually spent time with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who is actually a guru of Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. Very few people know this.
Oh yeah, I also spent time with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So you have like a combo there.
Yeah.
But I, in my personal spiritual journey, I happened to meet a lot of Sri Sri Ravi Shankar initiated, students or sadhakas, but I didn't see much of Mahesh Yogi.
No, you're too young for that.
But I have heard stories that he was great.
Very important figure in the history of all this, and the interaction between him and the Beatles, and the Beatles going to Rishikesh to spend time with him. That was it was such an important moment that the first sentence in my book, in American Veda, is about the Beatles going to India. And I said, when they went for their retreat in India, it was, I forget the exact words, but I said it was the most important or consequential spiritual retreat since Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness.
Wow.
And I thought, I'm going to keep that in there. My editors did. No one objected. And I thought, I'm going to get a lot of angry emails about it. Got none. No one disagreed with me. It was a very important moment. It made all the core teachings from India
Mm-hmm.
in the Upanishads and in the Gita and all the Vedanta and yoga, it made everybody much more interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that had a transformative effect on Americans. It led to, the mainstreaming of meditation and yoga, and certain ideas that have been transformative.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And any memories of any supernatural experiences with spiritual experiences?
You'll have to ask other people for that. I'm not. I've never been. Meditation and you know my sadhanas have had they've transformed my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I never had supernormal experiences or anything spectacular. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Just having more inner peace and higher awareness is fine for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think a bigger heart. But people had to have those experiences around gurus, as you know, and I know many people who had them around Maharshi and Sri Sri and others. So, but I don't put as much stock in that. It's how it changes your life that matters to me.
Right. And do you think transcendental meditation is still relevant in today's time?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I still practice it. I know many people are still taking it up and learning it. It's a traditional form of meditation that is effective, so people do it.
Okay. Good to know. And when you mentioned about your tours, I saw you actually visiting like spiritual hubs in India.
Yeah.
You're covering almost all important places.
Yeah.
I could see the places for Maharishi Ramana. I see places in Tamil Nadu. Tell us about something
My
about
tours?
Yeah.
After American Veda came out, I was lecturing here and there, and every once in a while I think I could take people to India and take them to holy places and the places associated with the main gurus who have come here, the ones they're familiar with, like Maharshi, like Yogananda, and of course Swami Vivekananda, his lineage, and all the others that came later. And so I had the idea, but I never would have done it if I hadn't met somebody who was a fan of the book, who said she'd do all the organizational work. So we've done it. We've had four or five tours now, and they're very popular. And we take people to different parts of India, to traditional tourist places like temples and historic landmarks, but mostly we meet swamis, we meet gurus, and because of the book, I'm able to set those things up. So we spent a couple of tours. We visited Kolkata, and we went to the Bellermut where Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda started induction S4, and we go to the home that Yogananda grew up in his teenage years, and those kind of things. And in Rishikesh, we go to the ashram the Beatles were in, and we go to visit other gurus and swamis, and it's been very satisfying for people. And of course, Varanasi and Tiruvannamalai and places like that. One tour we stopped in Ganeshpuri, which is where Swami Muktananda's ashram was. So we try to do those kinds of things.
So among all of these places that you just mentioned, which one is your most favorite?
It's either Rishikesh or Varanasi. There's something about being in Varanasi by the river. The other parts of Varanasi are crowded and noisy, and but along the river, I just love it there, and I just like walking up and down and taking people on the boats. And and in Rishikesh along the Ganges. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas. So I love those places.
Yeah, I heard there is a special spiritual effect in those areas. If you
There's no question.
Yeah.
You feel it. But when you get away from India's a noisy, crowded place, but along the river, you realize, this has been a holy place for thousands of years, and you feel it. You feel it when you sit in a temple there, or just, any little shrine along the river, or an ashram, on the Ghats in Varanasi. You feel it.
Beautiful. So coming back to American Veda, what is the essence of this particular book if somebody really wants to read it but doesn't know?
What I always tell people of who are from India, whether they're born of Indian heritage, is that the teachings that begin in the Vedas, especially the Vedanta teachings of the Upanishads and the Gita, they've had a much more transformative effect, a bigger effect on Americans than people realize. That even Americans don't realize. That's why I wrote the book. And the history of it, I think, is very important in the context of American history and of the meeting between East and West. I think the acceptance of these teachings by Americans over the course of 200 plus years has changed American culture, certainly changed American spirituality and religion. And when you look at the data on how people's attitudes about spirituality and religion have changed in the last 40 or 50 years, it becomes more and more Vedantic. I often give talks I call with the title "A Nation of Yogis," and you could see this, the emphasis on individual practice, on turning within, on carving a path of individuality where practice is more important than dogma and belief. All these trends in American life are traceable to Hinduism and Buddhism having an impact on not as religions, but as perspectives. It's not a question of Americans converting, because the gurus never asked anybody to convert. They were just offering teachings and practices that can improve your life, whether you're an atheist or a Christian or a Jew or whatever. And that's had a huge impact. And the way it happened is also, that's one of the things about the book. The reason people don't realize it is until the last few decades, most of the teachings that came here, first it was just books. And some of the great figures in American history, like Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau, and Walt Whitman, whose impact is still felt 200 years later, they were reading the first translations of the Gita and things like that, and it changed them. And it affected their writings and their philosophies. And young people read those books in school now, and they absorb these ideas. And then, starting with Vivekananda in 1893, Swamis and Gurus and Yogacharyas started to come. Yogananda in 1920, and he stayed here and lived here, which is why I wrote this biography of him. And then in the 60s, beginning, as you said, with Maharshi, and then Srila Prabhupada and Muktananda and Satchidananda, all these teachings came teachers came in the 60s and 70s, and more came later.
Mm-hmm.
They had a big effect, but it wasn't just a direct effect on their students.
Mm.
Vedanta philosophy, especially, had a big effect on Americans who became famous and who reached millions of people with their own ideas and their own philosophies and their own scientific research, their own scholarship, their own art forms, novelists and musicians and writers, philosophers like Aldous Huxley, and novelists like J.D. Salinger. All these people had gurus, and they were widely read in Vedanta, and it affected their lives. So there's millions of Americans who have been affected by those famous Americans, and they don't even know there's anything Indian going on.
Right.
They just absorb new ideas and new teachings that are put into terms that they can read and understand. And this has been going on for a long, long time. And now it's just part of the culture. Now we have thousands of research studies on the benefits of meditation and yoga. We didn't have that 50 years ago. Now we have psychotherapists recommending these things. We have physicians recommending these things. That's all because the ideas gained traction, and then people decided to do research.
So another question that comes to my mind after this narration is, do you think the Hindus in India have much appreciation for all this knowledge? Or Hindus abroad or in the Western culture, they have more appreciation?
This is a very good question. I'm not entirely qualified to answer it, but I'll tell you my impression.
Please.
Back when some of the gurus who became famous in America in the 60s and 70s, people would ask them, why are you spending time in America and Europe when India could use your help? And I remember at least one or two of them saying, people in India look to the West. They want to modernize. They want, to improve industry and government and raise their standard of living. And they look to the West for technology and productivity and all that. And they're not paying as much attention on their own spiritual tradition. So I'm here in the West, they would say, because if Indians see that Americans appreciate these teachings, they'll start to take it seriously, more seriously, because they were becoming materialistic. They wanted to grow the country and improve standard of living and all that, which is, of course, perfectly understandable. But many of the younger people would think the traditional teachings are old-fashioned. We want to be modern. And so they would reject it as, this is grandma's religion. And I didn't understand all that back in those days. But when American Veda came out, and I did a speaking tour in India, I went to about 18 different cities and spoke to places in a month. And they kept asking me to give talks at schools. And at one point I said, why schools? He said, we want young people are turning away from the traditions. And I said, but that's not my role. That should be their parents and their teachers. He said, but they won't listen to them. But you're from the West. And if you tell them that Westerners, Americans, are getting practical benefits that is helping them in business and in their studies, then they may pay attention. And so I thought, okay, if you want me to do it, I'll do it. But that seems to be a phenomenon that's worth people paying attention to. And I hear it from people in India, and I hear it from Hindu people here in America. So part of me, I remember when I was talking to a college or something, and I found myself saying, I understand, because everybody in the room, all the students were wearing blue jeans and Western shirts, except for some of the women in saris. And I said, if you want to imitate America, fine, fashion and technology, and automobiles and movies, fine. But don't imitate American eating habits,
Right.
and drinking habits, and materialism, and because you'll get sick like Americans do. And what happens when they get stressed out and sick? They turn to yoga, and they turn to meditation, and the teachings that come from your tradition. So if you want to imitate Americans, that's something to look at.
That's very interesting.
Afterward, I felt terrible, thinking, who am I to be talking to young people in India that way? But they wanted me to, so I did. So that seems to be a phenomenon then.